Okay, let's go ahead and move on. I give you our prompt here. It's basically what the conduit authority the authority of conduit financing looks like. Basically, our official report. And you'll see that it says District of Columbia, and then under that in parentheses, it'll say Gallaudet University. It's on the website as well, but I wanted to pass it out in case you were curious as to what it looked like. So what we're going to be discussing today is basically the process for organizations to go to public hearings and apply for tax-exempt bonds. So since I've had such a heavy involvement in this process, I've really learned the role of buying tax-exempt bonds and how that has really funded the infrastructure of America over the last 200 years. I also want to go over what exactly conduit financing is, and that's why I gave that official statement out to you all. So you could really see what the government process was. We were under the district's authority, and I'll go into more of that later, but so you can see exactly what that financing process was. And then the day when we actually sold the bonds and closed on them, and what the process was up until that transaction, and then how the funds were transferred to our project. So last year when I first got involved in this project, the financial advisor gave me a pretty thick book titled Municipal Bonds. So I was looking over that information, and I was really astounded by the fact that 87,500 state and local governments use tax-exempt bonds in order to fund their construction and their different projects. Of course, all 50 states are using them, but each state has a different division of their state and local government. Different utility projects such as sewer and water, maybe higher education, different things like school districts. All of those organizations are using tax-exempt bonds, and I was really surprised to learn that. So the second quarter of 2012, over 3.7 trillion municipal bonds were printed and dispersed in the market for various tasks such as transportation, buildings, infrastructure, different things all over the country. And those organizations are using the money they receive from tax-exempt bonds to fund these different projects. So different groups such as Higher Organization, the way Gallaudet used bonds last year, but also different companies such as hospitals, if they're looking to build a large new facility or renovate their facility, they might use bonds. Or if you're looking at a really big task, maybe such as an airport, you really can't expect one person or business entity to be able to fund that whole project. So that is when they go into using the bonds, because you're looking at the cost being in the hundreds of millions of dollars for such large facilities. I mean, those things are very expensive to build and to maintain, like the electricity or the actual construction. So maybe they have to put their project on hold, wait till they get those bonds, and then come back to their project. And So the instrument there, this is where I got all my sources. As you'll see from that pamphlet that I passed out, it's basically the fundamentals rulemaking for the Board of Securities. If you're required by law that all organizations that sell tax-exempt bonds must share their instructions on the website. Essentially, the role of government-issued bonds play a much bigger part in our country's economy than we really think. So this is the District of Columbia government. We were essentially under them, and we worked with their revenue bond program department. It was a wonderful experience, really, and they were the ones that helped us along in the issuance of our bonds. I would be able to email the head of the department, call, what have you, and they would answer my questions almost immediately. But it's also smart because the government wants to improve their landscaping and they want to improve their economy. So, of course, they're going to put helpful people in their department. And this office is under the Deputy Mayor Planning and Economic Development Agency. So what exactly does the conduit financing process looks like? Well, when Gallaudet decided that we were going to raise funds for this project, a few different projects actually on campus that we wanted to renovate, we had to go through the DC Revenue Bond Program, contact that department, and then they gave us a huge stack of paperwork, a bunch of things that we had to abide by and sign. And we had to fill all that out in order for them to give us the authority to sell bonds. So after we contacted the district's government, we were required to meet a few different conditions, but these were the three most important. So the source of employment said that if DC local government was willing to give us the authority to issue tax-exempt bonds, then we must give the district's workers and contractors first priority in the project when we were creating our tax-exempt bonds. So basically what that means is when we were building Dorm 6 and we had the money ready for the project, we of course had the construction site and maybe 20, 30 different temporary places there because they all have to construct different things and build different things, right? So DC says that 51% of those workers in that particular project have to be located in residents of DC. But it makes sense though that any government agency that is going to give you the authority to build in their city and create infrastructure would also want to benefit their employees and their residents first. So of course we had to meet that demand and decide who exactly was going to be in the building construction of Dorm 6. So with the contractors in DC, we had to negotiate different things, different specifications, create different positions such as maybe supervisor, electrician, drywall, different categories such as that. And then contact the DC source of employment services and see where we could get DC residents that were qualified for those positions. And then negotiate with them, and that way we'd be able to sign local citizens and meet the government's demands. We also had to be certified business entrepreneurship, which basically means that DC, if they fund you to get bonds, that they want to see the economy develop. So the business and entrepreneurship has different preference priorities when they're issuing bonds. So basically, if we have a contractor who moved to set up the wiring and the plumbing lines in Dorm 6, if we hired a local business to do all of that, then we would get credit, and it would assist us, and it'd be easier for us to get approval next time we want to apply for tax exempt bonds. But if, let's say, we awarded the contract to an outside business and gave them all of the jobs, then we would have a much tougher time next time receiving the authority to sell bonds. And one of the last requirements by DC was to, and something I never really thought about, but after we went through the process, it seemed really obvious. But of course, this was our first time. Essentially, the DC local community, they have to support the project. So if you have, let's say you have a qualified organization that wants to build, suppose a hospital, and it's in a quiet neighborhood, a quiet street. So they get approval for the project, but then the local community gets upset because they have nowhere to park. It's noisy, there's traffic. So DC wants to make sure that we're working with the local community. Ward 5, which is our district, so we went to their meeting over kind of northeast. We went to a conference there to present our ideas and our intentions for this new building project. But we wanted to assure them that it would be inside of our gated community. Essentially, it would not affect their everyday living. And the local community voted, they approved, they supported our project, and we sent that letter to the DC Constitution saying that Gallaudet's project was now supported. Of course, we had to meet their deadline and a bunch of other different requirements, but these were the three most prominent. Oh yeah, did you have a question? Okay. Okay, that's fine. So how much money did Gallaudet raise? Well, it was actually $40 million. And that was the first time in Gallaudet's history. I mean, you're talking 150 years that the school has been open, so that was a pretty big deal. And you might have been wondering, what exactly is conduit financing? Essentially, we have the authority to borrow that money from the DC government. Essentially, when they sell those bonds, it will go to the Board of Trustees. They will hold that money. The government doesn't give it straight to us and just basically write us a check. But essentially, they let the Board of Trustees hold it. So then we go to the building contractors and we have to write our checks to them. We go to the Board of Trustees. We request the money, they transfer it to us, and then we transfer it to our subcontractors. So the $40 million was spent on different projects, but the most visible one is going to be our newest dorm that recently opened. And we spent $18.7 million on that one. The next project is not necessarily something you can see around campus, but we basically wanted to generate reusable energy. So we spent $10.6 million on things like putting new units in buildings to heat them better, to save heat, different things like water conservation. Excuse me. It's different things like geothermal and green projects. What is that called? The student appreciation last year, student on the greens. Um, it was beautiful, but it's funny that most of the renovation is actually underground. The wells underground would help to cool the new dorm. One of the last $5 million that we wanted to use to renovate historic housing, such as the Dawes House, Fay House. We wanted to renovate them. We renovated one historic house a couple of years ago, but we were thinking about what exactly we wanted to do with that $5 million, and that seemed to be the best idea. But then that last $3.5 million really went to fees. $2.7 million went to the capital insurance interest, and we had to give all that to the board of trustees. So every 6 months, they would be able to pay that money to the investors. Essentially, this is how we spent the $40 million that was issued in the bonds. So last year, when we were really getting started in this project, I had the chance to meet a lot of different people, and of course the city of DC, their government, and those that worked with us and for us. Of course, the financial advisor. In our case, he was crucial because he was the one that helped us. He had a lot of experience. He had worked with Amtrak and different organizations before, so he was the one that really walked us step by step through this process in order to be able to do all the paperwork and go ahead with applying for our bonds. And I don't think we would have really been able to do this without our financial advisor. So Gallaudet had to get approval from the federal government in order to be able to issue those bonds, have the authority to issue those bonds. So we had to make sure we were going through the proper procedures, and that's why we needed the bond counsel. So we had our underwriters. We had a couple different companies. Wells Fargo was they were our primary underwriter. And then we had our co-underwriter, IFC Financing. So they worked with us, advertised for us to make sure that our bonds were getting sold and that the word was out there to investors and that they were ready to purchase our bonds for us. They even gave us access to their system, which was pretty neat because we could get to see how bonds were selling by the hour. There was actually plenty of investors that were really interested. So that's really how we worked with the underwriters and their organization. So when you think about credit ratings, usually you think about personal financing such as FICO, when they score your credit history, but organizations, large organizations also have to use them as well. You have 3 different ones. You have Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and you have 500. So those are going to be the 3 biggest ones that are going to give you your credit ratings, and they're the ones that play a big role in exactly how the government wants to rate our bonds.